So we are still in the week of November 2nd through the 5th, covering the digestive system, respiratory system. So we finished respiratory system, so we're going to cover digestive system. And also just keep in mind, you do have quiz 5 over the respiratory system this week. Okay, quiz 5 over respiratory system. Okay. Let's talk about the digestive system. It's also known as the GI or gastrointestinal tract or the alimentary canal. Digestion is both physical and chemical. Okay, so you're trying to basically break down food into molecules that can dissolve, right? Soluble, that will end up being absorbed into your bloodstream. So what's the digestive system do? Well, it ingests food and breaks down food into smaller molecules. You absorb the nutrient molecules and you eliminate waste that you can't digest. Okay. Pretty straightforward, I think. So here's some structures in the digestive system you need to be aware of. So food typically enters your digestive system through the mouth. And so your mouth has your teeth in it, help you chew your food. Your tongue gives you some sense of taste. Also can push food, allow you to chew and swallow. In your mouth area, you also have, for oral cavity area, you have your salivary glands, parotid, sublingual, and submandibular. Okay, sublingual means under the tongue, lingual is tongue, mandibular has to do with the mandible, right? So they secrete saliva and digestive enzymes. Salivary amylase breaks down sugar. Food gets pushed down into your pharynx. So that's where your food gets swallowed down to your esophagus. And it is a passageway, a process called peristalsis, pushes your food down into your stomach. So at the stomach, you have acid that's secreted, okay, as well as other digestive enzymes, break down proteins, churns your food, mixes it up with those different secretions, and at that point we call that food chyme, C-H-Y-M-E, and sends that chyme into the small intestine. Okay. Small intestine here. So it mixes that chyme with more digestive enzymes, continues to break down your food. It's also where most of your nutrient absorption occurs. Okay. Gets those nutrients into your bloodstream. And it also can secrete digestive hormones into your blood. Food then, or what's left of your food or chyme, moves into your large intestine. Okay. Ascending, transverse, descending, also known as the colon. And it absorbs water and salt to form your feces. Okay, rectum is where your feces is stored and regulated, and it's released through the anus. Okay, other accessory structures include the diaphragm, excuse me. All right. Your liver, and helps with metabolism, processes and stores some of your nutrients. And it produces bile, helps you break down fats. And that bile gets stored in the gallbladder. When it's needed, it sends that bile to the small intestine to break down fats. Also have a pancreas, secretes pancreatic juices, has digestive enzymes in it as well. and it sends the pancreatic juice to the small intestine. Pancreas is also responsible for producing insulin, okay? And it secretes that insulin into the blood after you eat. Help you regulate your what? What does the insulin help you regulate? You might remember? Blood sugar, right? It's part of what other system? Endocrine system, right? And there's the appendix. Okay, it doesn't really do much, but if it gets inflamed, gets feces caught in there, and you can get appendicitis. Those are some of the basic structures. All right, mouth and oral cavity. Start with the tongue. Tongue is actually made up of skeletal muscle. All right, movement of your tongue is voluntary. You also, on your tongue, have papillae. The papillae help your tongue handle the food that you're eating. And that's also where the taste buds are. And a piece of tissue called the lingual frenulum attaches your tongue to the floor of your mouth. Now, the roof of your mouth, the top of your mouth, separates your oral cavity from your nasal cavity. And the roof is composed of your hard palate and your soft palate. Next, we'll talk about the teeth. So the teeth, you start out as you're growing, you got baby teeth, right? Also called deciduous. And there are 20 of those. When you start getting your adult teeth, you're going to end up with 32 adult teeth. And those teeth are embedded in your maxilla, upper jaw, mandible, lower jaw. Okay. So per jaw, you've got 4 incisors, 2 cuspids or canines, 2 bicuspids or premolars, or 4 bicuspids rather, and 6 molars. Okay. 4, 2, 4, 6 per jaw. Okay. So the structure of the tooth, the layer that you see is the crown. It has layers of enamel, and underneath it there's dentin. Underneath that there's pulp. Now what you typically don't see is the root. And it has cementum, which helps connect it, some dentin as well as pulp. Diseases related to the teeth. Okay, it's dental caries, and that can occur when you get bacteria that start breaking down sugars and start making acids that erode your tooth enamel. Okay, we call that dental caries. And gum diseases, more likely as we get older, things like gingivitis, inflammation of the gingiva or our gums, and periodontitis, okay, more of an inflammation of the teeth themselves. Okay. So important, why it's always important to take care of your teeth, right? All right, so there's your diagram of your mouth. You got the hard palate. More posterior, you have the soft palate. The dangling piece there, sometimes you see in the old cartoons, is a uvula. Okay. There are the tonsils back there, lymphatic structures. Here are your molars. 3 on the bottom, 3 on the top. Premolars, your bicuspids, your canine or cuspid, and your incisors. Now on the tooth itself, here's your enamel. Underneath it's a layer of dentin. Underneath that is your pulp, and that's where your nerves and blood vessels are. Nerves shown in yellow. Arteries and veins are shown in, or arterioles and venules are shown in red and blue. There's the bone. Okay, this structure, or part of the pulp that goes down into the root, is your root canal. Okay, this structure kind of between the bone and the dentin is the periodontal membrane. This thin layer connecting the periodontal membrane to the dentin is cementum. Okay, but here's your crown, here's your root. Okay, salivary glands. You have 3 of them: parotid, sublingual, and submandibular, right? With the mandible. So what's in your saliva? Well, it is mucus and water. Saliva is made up of salivary amylase. Okay, it's a digestive enzyme. Helps you break down carbohydrates. Okay. Remember, that's one of our 4 classes of biomolecules. Moistens the food, prepares it so you can swallow the food. You also have antibacterial lysozymes that can break down bacteria, as well as secretory antibodies, right? Part of your immune system, help you fight infection, because that's one of the entry points to your body, right? All right, the pharynx, it's the passageway for food and air. You have 3 parts: your nasopharynx, your oropharynx, and your laryngopharynx. So you learned about this on Monday, previous video. All right. So nasopharynx, so you should only have air there. Oropharynx, you got food and air. Laryngopharynx, you should have food only. Your tonsils, you have the palatine tonsils and the lingual tonsils and the pharyngeal tonsil, also known as your adenoids. Okay. And if you get these infected, you may have to have a tonsillectomy to get them removed. All right. So swallowing starts voluntarily, okay? You're deciding to swallow your food. And then you have a reflex action. So once you push food or drink back into your oral pharynx, you get a reflex, all right, to help you move that food down so you don't choke. Now, term we use for the food, once it's been chewed and swallowed, we call it a bolus. All right, so here's the diagram of swallowing. Okay, so here's your food bolus. You're chewing on it. Okay, moving it into your oral pharynx. Okay. So at this time, your esophagus is closed, your trachea is open. Okay, but once you move that food down into your oral pharynx, close up, your epiglottis is going to cover up your glottis. Okay, so then essentially your pharynx is closed, or trachea is closed. Your trachea is closed and your esophagus is open. Okay, so that way food's not going down into your trachea. So the epiglottis is keeping food from going into your trachea. All right, so let's stop there and talk about the different digestive structures that you've learned about so far. So things like the mouth, the teeth, the tongue, okay, pharynx. And you can do this at home as well. All right, so let's talk more about the wall of the digestive tract. So you have a mucous membrane layer, or mucosa. And there you have a layer of epithelium. Remember, we learned about different types of epithelium. One of our tissue types lines what we call the lumen of that space inside your digestive organ, or the wall of your esophagus or intestines. Okay. Made up of glandular epithelial cells, just means it's epithelial cell that has glands in it. Okay. And those glands will secrete different digestive enzymes. You also have goblet cells. And those goblet cells are going to secrete mucus. You also have another layer of submucosa. Sub means usually below or beneath. So here you have loose connective tissue. Typically it's going to have blood vessels and lymphatic vessels and nerves in the submucosa. You can see that here. Okay. Blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves. In the submucosa, you also have what we call Peyer's patches, and they're scattered throughout the submucosa. All right, now we're starting to get into the smooth muscle. And we have a muscularis layer. It's inner, more circular. So you have one layer that's inner and circular, and one layer that's outer and longitudinal. Okay, so you're gonna essentially what that means is you have two layers of muscle. One layer is going to look like a ring. It's going to look like a circle. The other layer, the way the muscle runs, the fibers run, is more longitudinal. So it's going to look different. Okay. Stomach will have an extra oblique layer of smooth muscle. Remember, oblique means at an angle. Okay. So we'll have a third layer of smooth muscle. And that should make sense because your stomach is having to do a lot of squeezing to mix your food, right? With the acid in your stomach. All right, so now you've got the serosa, or serous membrane layer, and it's a thin layer. It's your outermost layer, okay, most superficial, and it's made up of squamous epithelium. And because it's serosa, it's serous fluid. All right, it's a serous membrane. Now, in the esophagus, we call the outer connective tissue layer adventitia. All right. So a few different ways to look at it. So here you've got your mucosa layer. Deep to that, submucosa, kind of your lavender layer. And you've got your muscularis. Okay, and here's your circular layer, longitudinal. And then you got your serosa. Okay. All right. So this is more of a cross section. So again, you got your mucosa in purple, submucosa in blue, muscularis purple. It's the circular layer and the longitudinal layer. Okay. Then we've got the adventitia because this is the esophagus. Okay. That's what we call the serosa. Okay. Leading into the esophagus, again, it's our muscular tube. It goes from your pharynx down to your stomach. So the process of moving the food is called peristalsis. Okay, it's involuntary. And you don't have to think to make food go down from your pharynx to your stomach. Pushes food along that alimentary canal. So the function of your esophagus, again, transporting food to the stomach. All right, it's typically not going to be involved in any kind of chemical digestion. Okay, so you have these sphincter. It's an esophageal sphincter, and it marks the entrance to the stomach. So basically, the esophagus moves the food down to the stomach. Okay. Stomach, unless the stomach says the food can enter, it stays basically at the door. Okay, once that sphincter opens, then the food can go into the stomach. Okay. Now, anybody ever get heartburn? Okay. So heartburn is basically when contents of your stomach get into your esophagus. So that sphincter may be open a little bit, and fluid and food maybe backs up into the esophagus. And again, what's going to be in that food that's in your stomach? Acid. So that's why I call it acid reflux, because it's going back into your esophagus. Okay. So if it's a chronic, long-standing disorder there, they call it GERD.
Is that I can't remember what it's called, like Barrett's syndrome or Barrett's? Does that have to do with the?
It can, but this is more generic, whereas that's going to be like more of a specific case. So, all right. So here's a picture of peristalsis. So think of it as if you have the tube and the tube is being squeezed, and as the tube is being squeezed, the bolus moves down your esophagus. Okay. So that smooth muscle is contracting, and it's like a beat. It contracts. It's a coordinated contraction moving that food down your esophagus. Okay, and we call that a peristaltic wave. All right, and then you get to the esophageal sphincter. All right, so when that sphincter relaxes, food can enter the stomach.
So is there two types of sphincters?
There are multiple sphincters in your digestive system. So this is just the first one. It's a good question. So moving on to the stomach. Here you have a essentially thick wall organ, has kind of a J shape to it, and then it's curved. Typically it's going to be on the left side of your abdominal cavity. It's going to be continuous with your esophagus, as well as the duodenum of the small intestine. Now the folds in the wall, you'll see all these little kind of like little wrinkles in the wall of the stomach. We call those rugae.
So is it kind of like the brain when it had
the gyri and the sulci? It's very similar, except here we don't really differentiate between the curves up and the curves down. Okay. So the function of the stomach: stores some food temporarily, liquefies it. You get digestion of proteins in the stomach. That's where that starts. And also, it's going to move food into your small intestine. All right. I know you probably thought, well, it's just the stomach. Well, anatomists actually say that there are regions of your stomach. Okay, we have a region that's the cardiac stomach, a region that's the fundic stomach, a region that is the body of the stomach, and a region that's the pyloric stomach. All right, so here's a picture of the stomach. So toward the superior end of the stomach, you have what we call the fundic region. All right. So just a little inferior from the fundic region is your cardiac region. Part of that's because your heart's kind of sitting or pointing down onto the stomach there. Okay. So call that the cardiac region. The wall of your stomach, okay, the inner layers of muscle tissue. Okay, it's particularly in the longer portion of the stomach. We call that the body. Okay, again, your muscularis layer has 3 layers: longitudinal, circular, and oblique. Remember, the oblique is angled. Here are your rugae and your mucosa layer. Okay. So just like you have an esophageal sphincter here connecting the stomach and the esophagus, we have a pyloric sphincter connecting the stomach with the small intestine. And it's called the pyloric sphincter because this region right before it is the pylorus. Okay. Now, if we want to look at this more on a tissue level rather than the organ level, we see that you've got these with the rugae, which you end up getting on a tissue level, are little gastric pits. Okay, and so in these gastric pits, you have glands. Okay, and you have cells, like the cells lining the pit are called parietal cells. You also have a few chief cells, which we'll get into later. But these cells have a lot to do with the enzymes that are secreted into your stomach to break down your food. Okay. So here's your gastric pit, but this whole thing is considered a gastric gland. Okay, digestive functions of the stomach. So the stomach has a chemical function, okay? You put in chemicals, enzymes, acid into your stomach to break down food. It has a physical function in terms of its ability to contract and mix your food, or mix your bolus. So the muscular wall of the stomach churns and mixes your food with that gastric juice. Okay, those gastric pits will lead down into those gastric glands where the gastric juice is produced. So you'll actually get some absorption in the stomach, but it's for alcohol and water, okay, in the stomach wall. All right, so that bolus, when it gets churned up and that gastric juice mixture gets mixed in, we call it chyme. And it's going to stay in your stomach for 2 to 6 hours, and then it's going to leave. All right, so your ulcers, okay, this is a medical term related to the stomach. These are open sores in the stomach, and they're typically caused by a bacterium. That's the Helicobacter pylori. Okay, pylori should sound like that pylorus area, pyloric sphincter. Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit more about gastric juice. And there's two cells that we really want to talk about, the chief cells and the parietal cells. So the chief cells will secrete an enzyme called pepsinogen. Okay, and pepsinogen can be converted to pepsin when it gets activated by hydrochloric acid. And pepsin is a digestive enzyme. Pepsinogen is sort of the precursor, okay, the thing that you use to make pepsin. Parietal cells, these are going to make your hydrochloric acid. Okay, so you can kind of see how the chief cells and the parietal cells work together. The hydrochloric acid will kill bacteria in your stomach. It also is going to activate that pepsin. And it's also going to produce what we call intrinsic factor. And the intrinsic factor binds to vitamin B12, keeps it from being destroyed when it's around all that acid. Okay, because remember, you take vitamins because your body typically is not getting them from the diet. So if you get whatever B12 you have, you want to make sure that, if you're ingesting it, taking vitamins, that you're actually able to use it. All right, so let's take a break, and basically I want you to talk to your partner about what you've learned about the stomach. You can do this at home as well. We've talked about the stomach. Let's talk about where food goes next, or your chyme goes next, the small intestine. So the small intestine will extend from that pyloric valve of your stomach and goes to the what we call ileocecal valve and then joins your large intestine. Okay, and if you were to stretch out your small intestines, okay, to be about 18 feet long. Okay, you may think, well, why do we call it small intestine? Typically because it's thinner than the large intestine. Okay, but stretches out a lot. All right, regions of your small intestine. You have the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. Duodenum has lots of folds and lots of villi. Okay, as we'll learn, those villi are helpful for increasing surface area for absorption of your food. The glands in the duodenum secrete mucus. Okay, it kind of helps to preserve that lining. And the duodenum will receive secretions from the pancreas and also will receive bile from the gallbladder. Your jejunum is the next region. Okay, the ileum, you'll have some Peyer's patches there, and we'll see some of that. And it also has a few folds and villi in it as well. All right, so here's a picture shows you your regions of the small intestine. So food's coming out of the stomach, going into the duodenum. Okay, then it's kind of more superior part of the small intestine is the jejunum. Its more inferior portion is going to be your ileum. Okay, and so the food will go to the large intestine through the ileocecal valve, coming out of the ileum. And then it's called ileocecal valve because of the ileum in this region of the large intestine called the cecum. Okay. All right, so more about the small intestine. So the wall of the small intestine, it has gone through certain modifications so that it has more surface area. And again, for more absorption. So you have circular folds, and these are permanent and they're transverse, okay, more kind of cross-sectional. You also have villi, and these are finger-like projections. And they have capillaries, as well as what we call a lacteal, which is a term for a lymphatic capillary, okay, for absorbing fluid, tissue fluid. And you also have microvilli. And these are microscopic, and we call that the brush border. So here's your small intestine. Here's the lining of the small intestine. Spaces, we call that space the lumen. So this is kind of what that, if we were to take a section of that lumen, this is what we would see. Section of the intestinal wall. Look at that under the magnifying glass. Here's your villus. Okay. So inside the villus, you have the lacteal, okay, and your blood capillaries. The lacteal kind of runs straight down the middle.
So this is like but lacteal, is that something like to do like people lactose intolerant or?
No, so this has more to do with fluid, whereas that has to do with your ability to digest lactate from milk that you drink or milk products. But good question. Yeah, most of the time the root words help you. In this one, it doesn't, but most of the time they do. You'll see a few goblet cells in the villus. They secrete the mucus. So then if we look at the villus under the microscope or under a higher power, on the surface of the villus, you have microvilli. Okay, so even smaller villi. Okay, on the surface of the villi, you have microvilli. And again, that also increases surface area. So what does the small intestine do? Well, it helps you digest nutrients like carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Break them down into soluble molecules, molecules that you can dissolve and absorb. So how do we do that? Well, bile and pancreatic enzymes from the pancreas will enter the duodenum, okay, for a more chemical digestive process. Okay, other intestinal enzymes will help complete the process of chemical digestion. All right, you can also absorb nutrients is another function of the small intestine. So molecules like sugars and amino acids will enter your bloodstream. Glycerol and fatty acids will enter through the lacteal. So movement of the food that is not digested will then go into the large intestine. So the goal is to try to absorb what you can in the small intestine. Okay, so whatever's left that doesn't get digested goes into your large intestine. All right, so at that point, we get what we call segmentation and more peristalsis, more of that involuntary contraction, moving food down your intestines. All right. So this is a digestive system, but the digestive system doesn't work alone. Okay, it works in concert with other systems, like the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So your central nervous system, your brain, your spinal cord, allows you to respond to signals of hunger. Okay, if your body's needing food, your central nervous system can interpret that. All right, you also have the enteric nervous system. And these are nerves in the walls of your digestive tract, gastrointestinal tract, and they can control their own movements and their own secretions. Okay, so there's kind of an internal nervous system there in your digestive system. Now, we also have some control by the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so remember the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system? Remember, parasympathetic is rest and digest. So it's the major controller of your activities in digestion. Sympathetic is fight or flight. So it's going to slow down your digestion. All right, you don't want to be using all your energy for digestion if you need to fight the bear, right? You need to kind of shut that down. All right, nervous control. So you have different phases. You have the cephalic phase, the gastric phase, and the intestinal phase. In the cephalic phase, you can see food or you can smell it. You get some sort of parasympathetic stimulation of gastric secretion. So it's like, you go in the movies. I mean, obviously we're not doing that much these days, but you go to the movie theater. What do you smell when you walk in the door? Popcorn, right? Makes you hungry all of a sudden. All right, your cephalic phase. Then you got the gastric phase. It stretches your stomach. And that causes contraction of your stomach, your gastric area, and secretion of gastrin by your gastric glands. Okay, and gastrin is a digestive enzyme. Now, you also have an intestinal phase. The gastric phase is in the stomach, intestinal phase is in the intestines. And the stretching of your duodenum is going to stimulate contraction of the duodenum. secretion of chemicals into the small intestine. Okay, it sends feedback information back to the stomach. Okay. Now, we don't just have nervous control, we also have hormonal control. So what other system is involved here? Endocrine system, good. All right, so gastrin, okay, is considered a hormone. All right, and it's, again, causing gastric secretion and contraction. Secretin, another hormone, is going to cause release of bicarbonate. Okay, and that is HCO3 minus from the pancreas. So it makes the liver, makes the liver make bile, and it makes the pancreas release bicarbonate. You also have gastric inhibitory peptide. It's essentially a protein hormone, and it inhibits actions of your stomach, slows down contraction in your stomach. Cholecystokinin, or CCK, is going to cause the pancreas to release enzymes, and it's going to cause the gallbladder to release its bile. Leptin is produced from the adipocytes, your fat cells. Okay, makes you feel full. Another hormone, ghrelin, comes from your stomach, and it's basically a stimulation that makes you feel hungry. All right, so here shows you a little bit of the hormonal control of your secretion. All right, so you can see there's feedback here going kind of in a loop. All right, gastrin can be secreted from the stomach, can also go to the blood vessels and back to the stomach. Pancreas, bloodstream can release CCK and secretin into the pancreas. All right, and those can also be released from the duodenum into the blood vessel. Secretin and CQK can also be released into the gallbladder, make it release its bile. All right, so let's take a break, and you can talk to your partner about what you learned about the small intestine. You can do this at home as well. All right, now we've discussed the small intestine. Let's talk about where your chyme is going to flow next. It's going to go into your large intestine. And it's called that because of the diameter. It's larger in diameter than the small intestine, but it's shorter. So its role is to absorb water, different salts, some vitamins, store food that you can't digest until you're able to eliminate it, right? So regions of the large intestine include the cecum. Okay, so it's basically it's a blind sac. It basically just means it's right by the ileocecal valve. Your appendix is attached there. And you have the colon, which you can divide into the ascending colon, transverse colon, ascending colon, and the sigmoid colon. Also, you have structures known as the haustra and the Taenia coli. Other parts of the large intestine include the rectum and anal canal. All right. So again, here's your appendix, cecum. All right. So this tissue here is their mesentery. You have blood vessels there. There's your ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon. There's your this little thin strip here along the midline is Tania coli. These little bumps there are your haustra or haustra. There's your sigmoid colon because it's kind of an S shape here. Rectum, anal canal. Okay. Another view, rectum and anal canal. And you got more sphincters, an external sphincter and an internal sphincter. Okay, feces. Actually, it's mostly water. Okay, 75%. 25% is solid. Okay, it is, and that 25% solid is made up of bacteria. Also, it's made up of fiber, other materials you can't digest. So the color of the feces comes from a product that comes from breaking down bilirubin. Okay, the colon bacteria are going to feed on cellulose, which is basically a long chain of essentially carbohydrate, but it's kind of an indigestible carbohydrate, at least by humans. And bacteria in the colon can break it down and produce things like fatty acids, B complex vitamins, vitamin K, as well as gas, right? It's the gas you need when you have gas. Okay, so there's actually something known as a defecation reflex. So when this happens, the rectal muscles will contract and they'll relax that internal anal sphincter. So feces is then going to move into the anal canal. You get voluntary relaxation of that external anal sphincter. Okay, pushing movement is going to move the feces out of the body. Okay. So frequency for which people defecate is much variable, not the same for everybody. All right. So that's sort of what happens normally. You know, what about bowel movements that aren't normal, right? Or doesn't happen all the time. Okay, two of the more common are constipation and diarrhea. Okay, so constipation and diarrhea are kind of like two extremes. Okay, so constipation, okay, feces is moving slowly because you absorbed a lot of water. Okay, feces end up being dry and hard. Okay, and chronic constipation tends to be associated with hemorrhoids. Okay, all right, so inflaming those sphincters. All right, diarrhea, moving as fast because you're not absorbing enough water. Okay. It can be due to an infection in your lower intestinal tract. Could also be due to some irregular stimulation from your nervous system. All right, but constipation, you get too much water absorbed, diarrhea, not enough water absorbed. Okay, other issues with the large intestine, you got polyps. Okay, and these are small growths on the epithelial lining of the colon. They can be cancerous or they can be benign. Okay, if they're cancerous, that's what we typically call colon cancer. All right, another disorder is diverticulosis. Here you get these sac-like patches that develop. Okay, kind of a derivative of this is diverticulitis, where there's some inflammation associated with steady pain and cramps, fever, vomiting, nausea, loss of appetite. All right. So we've covered some of the primary organs of digestion, let's start talking about some of the accessory organs. Okay. We've already, teeth and salivary glands are considered accessory, but we've already covered those with the oral cavity. So we'll move on to the pancreas. So the pancreas has both an endocrine function and an exocrine function. So the endocrine function is the pancreatic islets cells are going to secrete hormones like insulin, glucagon, somatostatin. That's the endocrine function. Exocrine function has to do with the acinar cells in the pancreas secreting pancreatic juices. All right, and in that pancreatic juice, you have sodium bicarbonate. Okay, and bicarbonate is more of a base. So it helps to neutralize the acid in the chyme. Okay. It's coming out of the stomach, right? Because the stomach has all of that stomach acid. Now, the pancreatic juice has different kinds of digestive enzymes depending on the type of food. So amylase is good for digesting starch, which is a carbohydrate. So you also have protein digesting enzymes, and they're typically released in an inactive form. Okay. So the pancreas releases trypsin, and it's activated by an enzyme called enterokinase. Chymotrypsin and carboxypeptidase are activated by trypsin. So trypsin has to get activated first, and then it can activate chymotrypsin and carboxypeptidase. The digestive or pancreatic juice also has lipase, and as the name suggests, lipase has to do with lipids, so it digests fat. You also have nucleases, and they break down nucleic acids. All right, so here's your pancreas. So right here, by the stomach, the pancreatic juices being secreted into the stomach. Actually, no, this is actually the duodenum, so it's being released into the small intestine, excuse me. All right. So if you're looking at this section under high power, you can see the exocrine cells. These are secreting the digestive juice. Here are your pancreatic islet cells that can secrete your hormones. Okay. All right, your liver. Liver has two predominant lobes. Lobe's going to be divided into different lobules, and hepatic is a root word, has to do with the liver. And those lobules have hepatic cells. They have hepatic, what we call sinusoids. We have what we call Kupffer cells. And those are phagocytic macrophages. They break things down, eat them. You also have portal triads located between the lobules. And it's triad because it's composed of three things. Composed of a bile duct, branch of a hepatic artery, branch of a hepatic portal vein. Okay. So those three things make up a triad. Okay, the bile ducts will merge together. They'll create what we call a common hepatic duct. And you also have central veins from each lobule that connect to form or enter a hepatic vein. All right, so here's a picture of the liver, right lobe, left lobe. Here's your gallbladder. If you look at the other side or flip it over, you can see the gallbladder here. There's the inferior vena cava. All right. There's your hepatic portal vein, hepatic artery, common hepatic duct. Okay. All right. So you can see a little bit here This little space here is your sinusoid, hepatic cells. Here's a good view of that triad, okay, because they're kind of right there next to each other. Okay. So functions of the liver: detoxifying blood, removing and storing nutrients, storing iron, as well as vitamins like vitamins A, D, E, and K. Okay, these are typically the more fat-soluble vitamins. The liver helps make what we call plasma proteins. The proteins in your plasma maintains the concentration of your blood glucose. So the insulin is going to store glucose as glycogen. Call that glycogenesis because they're making glycogen. Glucagon is going to break down glycogen to glucose. That's glycogenolysis. Okay, you get new glucose made from other molecules, and they call that gluconeogenesis. Okay, so the liver is involved in that process of maintaining your blood glucose levels. So your liver also produces urea, breaking down amino acids. Right? Remember, those are the building blocks of proteins. Liver forms and secretes bile. And the liver helps regulate your cholesterol level in your blood. All right, so disorders of the liver: jaundice. So jaundice, typically you're going to see yellowing of the whites of the eyes, yellowing of the skin. Okay? It has to do with bilirubin deposits there. Okay? Types of jaundice: you have hemolytic jaundice, obstructive jaundice, and hepatitis. Okay? And that's kind of an inflammation of the liver. All right, cirrhosis. Here you get a fatty liver. Okay, you also get liver tissue being replaced with scar tissue, and sometimes that can be associated with, heavy alcohol use, things like that. That can lead to cirrhosis of the liver. All right, gallbladder. So it's a sac on the interior surface of your liver. And it's going to store and concentrate your excess bile. So when it's needed, your bile is going to leave your gallbladder via your cystic duct. Okay. And then your cystic duct is going to form or join your common hepatic duct. And those two are going to come together and form the common bile duct. And that common bile duct will enter your small intestine at the duodenum. Okay, and also connects there with the pancreatic duct. So the material in bile are bile salts. And what do? They emulsify or break down fats. And they can, by doing that, they enhance absorption of fatty acids, cholesterol, and fat-soluble vitamins. Okay, so by breaking them down, they're able to be dissolved and absorbed into the bloodstream. All right, so we are going to pick up with chemical digestion next time. Let's go ahead and do our exit tickets. And we will see you all next time.